Earlier this year, an iconic Broadway composer, Charles Strouse, passed away. In this video, we'll learn about what made Charles Strouse such a talented yet complicated composer. His work spans 7 decades, encompassing a vast number of musicals, including mega hits like Bye Birdie and Annie. If you have been in or seen either of these shows, share your stories in comments below. For those longtime viewers, you'll immediately recognize this video as being different. For the last 10 plus years, this has been a completely faceless channel. Not that my identity or face was a secret, I've long linked my personal YouTube account in the description, and recently mentioned my other channel, The Instrument Makers, where I make documentaries about the people who craft the world's most fascinating instruments. While I started this channel to make academic content focusing on specific musical composition, for a video telling a story like this, I felt it would be best for you to see me communicate it. Anyways, if you haven't already, consider checking out my previous video covering William Finn, yet another Broadway composer we lost earlier this year. Before we begin, please consider subscribing. And if you like my content and wish to see more, please consider supporting me as a free or paid patron on my Patreon, where I write weekly reviews on new musical albums and movie musicals. I hope to release more Wicked Part 2 content and also continue my 5-part cabaret series, which I'm only 2 parts in so far. Charles Strouse wrote some of the biggest and most performed hits in history, but his life's work has been primarily defined by a long, bizarre string of flops. He was not a terrible composer by any stretch of the imagination. Later, we'll explore why his shows were not commercially successful, but to understand that paradox, let's take a brief look at his life and work. Charles Strouse, born in 1928 in New York City, had a musical childhood, playing piano and singing for his chronically depressed mother. He attended the Eastman School of Music for classical composition, studying with esoteric masters like Arthur Berger, David Diamond, and Aaron Copland at Tanglewood and Nadia Boulanger in Paris. However, it was Boulanger who ultimately recognized Strauss's true gift for writing light music. With his longtime collaborator Lee Adams, whom he met in 1949, he wrote his first big musical, the immediate hit Bye Birdie in 1960.
Sizzling steaks, all ready for tasting, and there's Cadillacs, all shiny and new.
William Finn, the subject of my previous video, cited this show as what made him fall in love with musical theater. For me, it was the same. As an 8th grader, I was playing the cello part in our middle school production of Bye Birdie. I even got to witness a classic theatrical moment. The conductor was vamping the orchestra, and he was waiting for the cue on stage to move on with the music. But unbeknownst to him, the cue had come and gone, so we were just aimlessly vamping. While I distinctly remember the actress on stage, who was in 8th grade Saleha Pfeiffer, yes, that one, who recently played Satine in Moulin Rouge and Eurydice in Hadestown, she was holding her position on stage awkwardly, waiting for the cue. Eventually, we figured it out. And a few years ago, I had the privilege of being able to direct Bye Birdie for the first time. And it was one of those shows, and if you've ever been in a show, you might be able to relate, where all the pieces were just coming together just right, and you knew that it was going to turn out to be a fantastic, amazing, a one-of-a-kind show. Now, this production of Bye Birdie was absolutely going to be that. Of course, we all knew what happened a few years ago. COVID shut down the production. It was very upsetting. Bye Birdie, I'm gonna... It was also at that time I made a music video about the title song, Bye Birdie, which was actually written for the movie adaptation sung by the gorgeous Anne-Margaret. This song really encapsulates what Nathan Hurwitz describes as there's a fierce intelligence underlying his writing. Although his songs may at first appear simple and straightforward, they are carefully and professionally crafted. Till you're gone to stay. What are the lyrics? Don't remember. But anyways, directing the show, I began to professionally appreciate the music. The score was notable as the first to truly incorporate rock and roll music.
If you're real sincere, if you're real sincere, if you feel it in here, then it's gotta be right, oh baby.
Which caused difficulties in raising funds until a Texas oil man saw it and loved it and gave the first $75,000 to let rehearsals begin. In the music, you can get a glimpse of his musical training breaking free in some of the polyrhythms and sophisticated harmonies. Bye Birdie would unfortunately be one of his few smash commercial successes. Here's a long list of shows that followed, a mix of ambitious near misses and spectacular embarrassing failures. His next show was All American. Strouse and Lee Adams teamed up with the now legendary, but unknown at the time, Mel Brooks. It was clear that there was difficulties in this collaboration as Mel Brooks never really finished writing Act 2 and somebody else had to finish it. Mel Brooks used this experience to write The Producers, about Broadway writers scheming to get rich by writing an intentionally bad musical and raising capital from producers. His next show would be a collaboration with Sammy Davis Jr., a young man from Harlem getting into boxing to escape generational poverty. Strouse and Adams had a grueling writing process as Sammy Davis Jr. wanted to improve every single last note and lyric. So nearly 3 years, the pair followed Davis Jr. around the country while he was on tour. Although it played 500 shows, it struggled to resonate due to its controversial natures of the time. A mostly black cast, an interracial romance/kiss, a heavily urban jazz score, and references to Malcolm X.
They win some races, stick around, lady, and see.
His next show was a baffling and amazingly hilarious one. It's a bird, it's a plane, it's Superman. It's incredibly campy, and in hindsight, the most hilarious show he's written. It didn't work, and apparently was the biggest financial Broadway flop of the time. Anyways, I'll let this clip play.
Come on, pal, let's go, bam. I need a little exercise. Take that, pal, and that's all. Let's see what you can do.
Their next show, Applause, was a decent success, and their last success they would have together. The iconic writing team of Betty Comden and Adolph Green was brought in to fix the book, which contributed to the success. This was another album that played on loop on my iPod when I was younger. 1971, Six. Not the modern pop musical, but Strauss's esoteric song cycle akin to a chamber opera. It was a song cycle about birth and death with political undertones. A contemporary New York Times review ended by saying that watching his colleague chewing gum in the front row set to music would have been more interesting. The music was also compared to the music of Alban Berg. The next show proved to be another flop, I and Albert, about a brief romance between Queen Victoria and Prince Albert, which only premiered in London and never made it to Broadway. However, it seemed to remain one of Strauss's favorite musicals he's written. John Yap, founder of J Records, wrote a touching story about how he went on a mission 10 years ago after the show closed to record the first recording of the show with the original leads and orchestrations. A long search of the orchestrations led him to a bankruptcy court warehouse. And next, a brief project of writing the underscore music to the Broadway revival of the play, The Member of the Wedding, which also flopped. This incredible string of flops would finally come to an end with Strauss's biggest work, Annie, in 1977. It ran for 6 years on Broadway and spawned so many tours, revivals, international productions, and movies, and remains one of the most performed musicals in schools. What followed Annie was a long list of follow-ups, smaller children's productions, regional productions, and flops. 1978, a Broadway musical, a semi-meta story based on Strauss's musical Golden Boy, and the difficulties of writing that. This musical flopped and ran for only one performance. 1980, Charlie and Algernon, based on the famous book Flowers of Algernon, only lasting 17 performances. 1981, Bring Back Birdie, a sequel to his wondrous hit Bye Birdie. It was panned for being tired and the score being inconsistent and lasted only 4 performances. At the time, Bye Birdie was still the most performed show in America, and Tams Whitmark, the licensing company for the show, commissioned Strouse to write a sequel. Money. But it was meant to be released only for licensing and not have a professional performance, the equivalent of direct-to-DVD. Some producers saw money potential, thus resulting in this ill-fated show. This is a trend we'll touch back on later. 1983, Nightingale, described by Strouse as a children's opera, though the New York Times review already criticized its yellow face in both the story, direction, characters, and incredibly in the now stale Chinese-style music. 1983, Dance a Little Closer, a musical he wrote with the legendary lyricist and writer Alan J. Lerner, who worked with Frederick Lowell to write such hits as My Fair Lady and Camelot and many more. Though at this point Lerner was losing energy and new ideas, the story was heavily criticized while the score was generally praised. It lasted 1 performance.
There is virtually no dancing. The show has the energy of an old schnitzel, and some of the performers actually seem to be in pain.
1985, Mayor, a comedic musical about former New York City Mayor Ed Koch. Though it ran off Broadway for a bit, its shelf life was limited as the show was incredibly topical and would remain dated. 1986, Rags, a musical about immigrants coming to America. For this, Strouse teamed up with Stephen Schwartz to write lyrics. Yes, him, the same Stephen Schwartz who wrote Wicked, among other fantastic musicals. And he wrote this with Joseph Stein, who wrote the book to Fiddler on the Roof. The challenge with this musical was that it was trying to tell the stories of too many different characters. It lasted 4 performances. But some later reworked versions proved to be more successful. The score, however, is cited by many as Strauss's best work. Incidentally and coincidentally, it has many similarities as the musical Ragtime, 12 years later, by Flaherty and Ahrens, who also wrote Suzago. Incidentally, I am in the middle of music directing a production of their musical, Anastasia, and I had also recently music directed their first musical, Once Upon an Island, a musical from 1990. And interestingly, the main musical leitmotif of Rags seemed to also be the musical leitmotif in Once Upon an Island as well. Hmm. 1989 would see a sequel to Annie called Annie 2, Miss Hannigan's Revenge. It was described as an immediate sucky show that lacked a good story or memorable music. It didn't even make it past tryouts in Washington, D.C. However, by 1993, it was heavily reworked, so much so that Miss Hannigan was written out entirely, and now titled Annie Warbucks. It played well off Broadway, but ultimately lacked the legs to transfer to Broadway. Back to 1989, a children's musical adaptation of Charlotte's Web. That isn't really meant to be a serious musical. 1991, Nick and Nora. The legendary Arthur Lawrence wrote the book, previously famous for writing West Side Story, Gypsy, and Anyone Can Whistle, among other shows. It was a sloppy mess and lasted 9 performances. Lawrence cited negative rumors persisting during their preview runs about problems. 1993, Bojangles, about Bill Bojangles Robinson. It was actually first written in the 1970s. This finally premiered at a regional theater but didn't go much further. 1998, Alexander and the Terrible, Horrible, No Good, Very Bad Day. Another terrible, horrible, no good, very bad children's musical that is rarely performed. 2002, Marty, marking another Lee Adams collaboration, performed regionally in Boston but failed to transfer. 2004, The Future of American Musical Theater, a short opera premiering at Eastman. 2005, Real Men, a musical about Strauss's observation on the changing world, like men kissing and women having belly buttons showing, performed regionally in Miami. 2006, Studio, a smaller musical about the struggles of making art, especially in the film media. Performed in Chicago, not much else known about it. 2009, Minsky's, based on The Ninth They Rated Minsky's, a 1968 musical that Strauss and Lee wrote the music and lyrics for. 2010, An American Tragedy, but was actually written in 1995. Finally premiered at Muhlenberg College. And 2011, Martin, a musical about Martin Luther King Jr., though it was apparently written back in 1985. Also probably performed, but didn't go much further. Phew, that was a lot. In total, he wrote 30 musicals, and to my count, only 2 real household hits. It's a remarkably poor track record for such a great composer, which begs the question, what happened? Strauss was a composer of immense craft, able to write infectious melodies in any genre, but he had an artistic limitation that was perhaps best summed up by his contemporary Stephen Sondheim. As Stephen Sondheim famously observed, and let me paraphrase, a Sondheim only has about 20 years to do their original work. Afterwards, they're kind of recycling what they've already done. This goes to the heart of the paradox. Strauss had an incredibly fruitful period of original sound in the 60s and 70s, but his later work was less about radical invention and more about mastery and refinement of his established style. The music was beautifully made, but the groundbreaking sound often ran dry. The single biggest reason for Strauss's flops was not his music, but his choice in collaborators and the quality of the book. His scores for shows like Rags are considered by many critics to be his masterpiece. Another issue was Strauss's slight naivety and compulsion. He always seemed eager to work on the next project, perhaps accepting projects others would perceive as doomed to fail. He prioritized the act of composing over commercial viability of the show. Crucially, he could afford this freedom. The massive constant royalties from his stage runs of Bye Bye Birdie and Annie, not to mention the theme song to All in the Family, acted as a safety net. Strouse didn't need a hit to eat. This allowed him to chase esoteric projects, the children's operas, That Mayer musical, the Chamber Cycle 6, without the intense pressure for commercial success. He was a composer who kept writing because he simply couldn't stop. Strauss's career is the perfect case study in the difference between craft and commercial success. He had the craft in spades, but his commercial judgment and collaborative luck were inconsistent. His hits like Bye Bye Birdie, Annie, and Applause are endearing classics that defined an entire era of American musical theater. His flops are a powerful testament to his unquenchable artistic drive, the compulsion to keep writing regardless of the odds or the outcome. He wasn't defined by his track record, but by his output. He was a composer who knew what he loved. And the lyrics, "Put on a happy face," wasn't just a song. It was a mantra for the artist who always chose the next project, even after the last one was disastrously closed. What is your favorite Charles Strouse score or song, including the flops? Let me know in the comments. Thank you for watching and remembering Charles Strouse with me. I'll see you next time.